tremendous amount of progress made. I mean, what a beautiful place to be. This is amazing. So I'm going to go through our slides, and very tough act to follow, Jack. I mean, what an incredible inspiration. So it's a privilege to speak after you. And I'm going to cover, I'm a scientist, as Ann pointed out. I'm a scientist at JDRF. I work in our New York City office, and I oversee our treatment program. So artificial pancreas and hypoglycemia research and diabetes complications. I'll cover our kind of a top-level version of what we're doing in research in general, and then focus on some of the artificial pancreas work. And I'll try to cover it relatively quickly so there's plenty of time. It's a small room, well, it's a big room, but it's a relatively small crowd, so folks have questions. I can make sure I get there. But really at JDRF, we've broadened our mission a little bit to make sure that we keep people healthy and happy until there's a cure. And that's kind of the motto, is less until none. How can we ease the burden so that people have less diabetes to deal with until we get to a cure? And that's kind of what guides our strategy. So our ultimate goal, and just to be very crystal clear, the majority of our funding goes to cure-based research, and our goal is no type 1 diabetes. I mean, I think we're all fully aligned in that. But until we get there, the goal is to ease the burden. And what does that mean? You can see this, and I think everybody here appreciates that managing diabetes is a 24-hour day, 365-day, 7-day a week, 365-day a year job. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work for. But it's for the person with diabetes. It's for the parent. It's for the spouse. It's for the loved ones. It's for the grandparents. It's a lot of work. And I think what we're trying to do as we move towards a biological cure where we walk away, the Holy Grail, is ease that burden. Make it less invasive, less devices. I'll talk about, a lot of people say, oh, you're the artificial pancreas guy. I don't, I wear a pump and a sensor. I don't enjoy doing that. And if we can make it less invasive, less complex, less dangerous, until we get there, those are some of the things we'll focus on. Which one, the top? Now, the other thing I think, and this is maybe a not intuitive slide, but it's just saying that, well, we're trying to focus on specific therapeutic interventions as we drive to a cure. So all the research that we're funding now, the lens that our scientists look at is this intervention meaningful to people? Does it have a side effect profile that's less than the side effect profile that we have now? Does it reduce complications? Does it reduce patient burden? Does it improve glucose control? Is it safe? This is a long-winded way of, the way I think of the world is it better glucose control, and does it make life easier? And are the side effects less than we have now? And it's pretty simple, but a lot of things, we'll talk about the artificial pancreas. The artificial pancreas was solved 30 years ago. Very effective artificial pancreas existed 30 years ago. The problem was you needed to put IV lines into your arm, and it was the size of a refrigerator. Really conducive to carrying around or going to work or playing golf or soccer. Yeah, so we've got to do better than that. And that's kind of also the lens. I'll talk about a sensor project. We need smaller, easier, more convenient, etc. Now, the other thing that we're very, very focused on at JDRF, and I think it's a huge improvement from when I started in 2004, is that to get something into the hands of a person with diabetes takes research, and obviously we're the JDRF, but it also takes a lot of things down, what we call downstream. Regulatory. You'll hear a lot in my talk, and you maybe have seen me talk about the FDA. It's a challenge, and if you don't address that, you can have a perfect solution, and we won't benefit. That's the other thing that I think is, when I talk to my team or our scientists, we haven't done anything that's really there yet until a person with diabetes is benefiting. And this is something that we are integrating our teams. So our Washington team and our research team, our advocacy team and our research team are now working hand in hand and actually under one umbrella. Because the research, unless it is delivered to patients or people with diabetes, we're not there yet. Now, I'm not going to make a pitch for money. Other folks here can do that. But it does take more money, and I am incredibly grateful as a scientist and a person with diabetes that folks like you are so generous and contribute, because the trials that I'll talk about tonight will be costly, and it's not easy to raise money now, so it's important to understand to get there it does take funds. So this is another graphical, and you can get these slides afterwards, representation of kind of how is the research staff at JDRF thinking about not research projects, I mean they're in the context of research projects, but about specific things that a person with diabetes will benefit from in the next year or two, in the next 5 years, in the next 7 years, and then in the longer term. And you can see there's a variety of different things here. I'll cover a couple of them from the nearest term. For example, better infusion sets. This is a huge, it's not super sexy to say, hey, I'm going to give you a better infusion set. But anybody in here who wears an infusion set knows that they're not fun to insert. They hurt after a couple days. They don't deliver insulin consistently.
One size does not fit all.
One size doesn't fit all. And that is something...
Don't sweat them.
They actually, the research that's gone into infusion sets is almost non-existent. And I got a big bugaboo, I got a big bee in my bonnet on this when I switched. I did shots for about 20 years, and I switched to a pump about 7 years ago. I couldn't believe the inconsistency in the insulin infusion. And JDRF has a fantastic partnership with BD that will eliminate many of these problems. And it'll be much, much better. So it's not a cure, but I think, I always joke, how many people enjoy changing and wearing their infusion sets? And I say, if you raise your hand, you probably want to see more than your diabetes doctor. We can do better, and we were funding a project. And I'll talk about some of these. But the bottom line with this slide is, we're focused on specific, I hate to use like jargon, but deliverables. What can we deliver to people, and on what time scale? So, artificial pancreas, I'll come back to this. You'll hear a lot about that. Another area that, I don't know if I have slides on glucose-responsive insulin, but people can ask questions about it. But the idea here, this gets people very excited. It gets me very excited. The idea is everybody who has a connection to diabetes in here knows about insulin. But if you think about Jack and myself and people who've been doing diabetes a long time, and where insulin has come from and where it's going, when my brother and I were diagnosed, we used cow and pig insulin. In the 80s and 90s, we transitioned to human recombinant insulin. So they make it with bacteria, and it's the same amino acid structure as made in the pancreas. The problem is, as everybody appreciates, it doesn't work as fast when you inject it through your skin as it does secreted from your pancreas. So we moved to insulin analogs. And insulin analog, what that means is they've taken this string of amino acids and they've plopped in some different ones here or there in specific places to try to help speed the insulin action. So we went from human regular to what we call rapid acting analog. Problem is, they still don't work as fast as the body normally does it. And then we also have other changes that make insulin work longer. Probably the most impactful version is Lantus, where they changed the molecule to have it release very slowly over time versus NPH, which was in a mixture that didn't really work so well. Now, a concept that's been around a long time is, well, why can't we make insulin that only works when glucose levels go above a certain number? And we call that glucose-responsive insulin. And we funded a project at JDRF, and it came to me about 5 or 6 years ago, where these guys had come out of MIT, and for I see some of the kids here who want to think about being scientists. This is a very good reason to go into science. These guys were biochemists, and they had figured out a way to make insulin glucose responsive. So I'm making a pitch for you to go into science. and you'll get it at the end of the story why it's a good pitch. So they had figured out a way to make insulin glucose responsive. We funded them, NIH funded them. It worked amazingly well. So again, not to use jargon, but the target product profile, what they envisioned the product looking like was a once-a-day injection where you did nothing else. The insulin was smart enough, they called it smart insulin, that it would only come off this, it was an inactive form, it would only be activated above essentially 120 or so. And then you would never test. I mean, to me, Ann said you could define cures. That's not a walk-away cure, but man, I could do 1 shot a day, nothing else. Never get low, never get high blood sugar. That's pretty close. So Merck bought this concept, this technology, this is where they go into science, for upwards of $400 million, and are now working on developing those. And a lot of people are very frustrated about the lack of, well, it's not speed and what's going on in Merck. I can tell you, I'm based in New Jersey. I work in our New York City office. Merck is in Rahway, New Jersey. We get over there regularly. There is a significant financial motivation for Merck to try to make this real. I always talk about why do companies, every pharma company wants to be in the insulin business because diabetes, unfortunately, is growing like crazy, type 2 especially. And it's almost impossible to get into the insulin business. It's very, very difficult because are you going to buy Kowalski insulin or Novo? Well, you're probably going to buy Novo. But what you need to do is have a differentiated insulin. And Sanofi came along and developed Lantus, better than NPH, $7 billion a year. So you can imagine this would transform diabetes. Could be a $20 billion a year drug. So I can tell you, Merck is working very, very hard to make this real. That was the best case scenario for us at JDRF because Merck has very smart chemists and a lot of money. So they're going to try really hard to make that work. And they're working on it right now. They have a huge team working on it. So what else is going on? Encapsulation on the cure side. To me, this is the most promising area of cure research that's going on right now. And you see the graphic that we have is a scuba diver in a shark cage, and the shark trying to get at the scuba diver but can't get at him or her. The idea here is, can we get insulin secreting cells into the body and not have to fix the immune system? Now we have a huge autoimmunity program, a lot of research. Bottom line is, it's going to take time. The immune system is incredibly smart, and incredibly sophisticated, and incredibly able to change and adapt. So it's a hard problem, and we're not giving up on it, but a potential workaround is what we call encapsulation. And I can tell you, and I told some of the folks earlier yesterday and this morning, that I was a huge skeptic of encapsulation. I've told the JDRF scientists this as well. Because my mom was talking about encapsulation in the early 80s, before I was even diagnosed, when my brother was the only one in our family with diabetes. And so when the JDRF said, oh, we're going to, the other scientists said, we're going to prioritize encapsulation, I was kind of thinking, well, we've been down this road, it's very difficult. What gives me a lot of hope in encapsulation recently is what we call macro encapsulation. So there's two ways to do it. One is we call micro encapsulation. You take cells and you I call it spray coat them with some sort of technology, and then you put them into a person, you squirt the cells in there, and they're protected from the immune system. So we have a partnership with a company called LCT. They're doing this. They have preliminary data that seems like it's promising, but there are some challenges. For example, the FDA worries about what happens if the cells go haywire. Can you track them down? Could we kill them if we didn't like what they were doing? It becomes a little more of a technical challenge. The other way to do it is macro encapsulation, and this would be, you would have a big bunch of cells and you would put it in something, I call it a sugar packet approach. Some people call it a tea bag approach, where you would have a bunch of cells in this packet, and then you would slide it under the tissue, and the idea you would keep it there and it would go for a year to 5 years at a time. Now that's pretty appealing because, again, I talked about the downstream challenges like FDA. Here, if the cells, if something goes haywire, they're in the cage. And FDA likes that because you can track them down and you can pull them out. So we're funding, there are a couple of companies working on this. We're funding one called Biosite, where they take cells, they put them in packets, they put them in animals, and they can effectively cure diabetes using this macroencapsulation approach. Hidden from the immune system, so you don't have to deal with the immune system here, which is good. This is a very high priority of ours. We have a bunch of incredible academic research going on this front, all around the world. Very, very promising and exciting. I'm sorry?
How are they delivering the insulin?
So now you have cells, and essentially what happens in these, at least Biosite, is the cells mature in these packets and become not just beta cells. They become beta cells, alpha cells, more islet-like. It's almost like islet transplantation without the immunosuppression. And they are then responsive to glucose changes in the body and secrete insulin. So the packet protects the cells from the immune response, but allows the cells to sense glucose changes, and the insulin can obviously then get out of the packet. So think of when you dip your tea bag into the tea, the leaves don't get out. Most people don't drink tea. Most people use tea bags, but the flavor does, and that's kind of the idea. That's the insulin.
It's simple, but so sophisticated.
Simple but challenging. You got to keep the cells alive. You've got to get the nutrients there. There's very sophisticated biology about the amount of distance your cells can be from blood and the nutrients that blood delivers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Do you start with a person's own beta cell?
So most of these companies, you're either taking stem cells or other cells, such as pig islets, for example.
You wouldn't take your own
No.
stem cell.
No. Generally, you need, one of the big challenges is to make this a business, which it needs to be, is you need a renewable cell source. And generally, the two renewable cell sources are stem cells or pig cells. Regeneration is the other approach on the cure side that we're spending a lot of time on. It turns out that people with type 1 diabetes still have beta cells that make insulin, actually. Not enough to what we would call glucose regulate. But if you we have a number of studies and look at people, even with 50 plus years of diabetes, you will see insulin producing cells in their pancreases. And what that tells us is, you get this autoimmunity, it kills off your beta cells, but what's probably happening is the beta cells are constantly trying to go again. And it makes sense to biologists. So, but the immune system doesn't like those cells anymore. When the immune system doesn't like stuff, it's pretty good at killing it. So, the question is, well, if you could get at that and specifically stop the immune response, you could probably have it from an inside-out cure to diabetes. Now, this is a harder challenge because we have to get at the immune response. And we have to get the beta cells going again. And there's some thought that it will take some coaxing to get those cells really fully, robustly making insulin. But there is actually a lot of overlap in beta cell regeneration with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Most of you probably know somebody who has type 2 diabetes, and they may be on insulin. The person with type 2 over time loses the ability to make insulin, and their beta cells kind of kaput from being overworked. So drug companies have a lot of work going on trying to get beta cells going again. So there's a lot of hope that beta cell regeneration will ultimately probably be the approach that allows us to have a cure that doesn't involve sticking stuff into us or having sugar packets or tea bags put into our skin.
I have one autoimmune disease in my family. Is there a chance that figuring out which are these cells will help your brain?
So the question is, if you have multiple autoimmune diseases, would this research help in celiac or other autoimmune disorders? There is a tremendous amount of crosstalk between the immunologists from type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac, to look at those mechanisms of dysregulation. Some of you may have seen there was an article recently about nanoparticle vaccines and getting the balance restored. Because the immune system actually works kind of as a yin and yang. You have cells that like to kill things and cells that like to keep things under control. And what happens is we have an imbalance in autoimmunity. And there's a feeling that if you could get that balance back, it probably would be applicable beyond type 1 diabetes. So
Hopefully one daughter could save the other.
hopefully, absolutely. Prevention is another area of focus of ours. The sad fact is if we have a loved one with type 1, our other ones are at a significantly increased risk of type 1 beyond the general population. So prevention is a big area of focus. If you talk to, surprisingly, if you talk to many adults with type 1, they would prioritize, if we were to go out and poll, what should we focus on most? Most adults would focus on prevention versus a cure, surprisingly. But if you're a parent, you appreciate, like, I worry much more about my kids getting diabetes than I worry about my own diabetes. And I worry about my brother often more than I worry about myself. So prevention is an area that's meaningful to us. And again, we're not giving up on a cure, but prevention has a lot of overlap with the cure research that we're doing. And this is an area where we know people are at risk. Can we stop it from happening? A big area of focus of ours. And there's two different ways. One would be taking the people who have autoantibodies, for example, already and trying to stop that. One would be trying to get a vaccination for the general population. This is a harder goal. Secondary prevention, they're already looking at trials to try to do that. So if you have a child who has 2 autoantibodies and has a very high risk of developing type 1, could we stop that from ever happening? This would be general population, which is a higher bar. So I am going to work, I'll do a couple slides on artificial pancreas. Where are we? Because this is a near-term solution that's going to happen soon. Just very quickly, the background, why do we need an artificial pancreas? I think this is obvious for everybody. But just to give you some data. This is just data, and you don't have to read this, I'll say it. There continues to be too much high blood sugar. That's the bottom line. So when we did a CGM study and looked at kids, teenagers, and then adults, the average amount of time above 180 for a kid in the United States, and this is at the best centers in the United States, is over half of the day. We actually now have a big study, and the average A1C in the United States for a 17-year-old is about 8.7. So that means they're spending probably about 18 hours a day of online. So we have a tremendous responsibility to do better. And we need tools to do better. This is another area that's a big area for everybody, but it resonates with me especially. This is a slide from a CareLink download that shows the insulin delivery the glucose and insulin delivery for a 16 or 17-year-old girl from Palo Alto, California, who was a rower. So we talked about exercise, Jack and I'll talk about my exercising. But everybody who has kids doing sports worries about overnight lows. She was having overnight low issues. And you see that her blood sugar started when she went to bed, was fine, it was just above 100. Then it bottomed out overnight. And she had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hypo alarms, but didn't wake up. Very common. Hypo alarms don't always wake you up. In fact, they only wake you up about a quarter of the time when you're low. And then she had a seizure. But what happened during that time with her pump? Her pump actually, not only did it continue to deliver insulin, it actually automatically turned her basal rate up, because that's what most people do in the morning. Their basal rates turn up for high blood sugar in the morning. So she had a seizure. Unfortunately, she's fine. But this shows you something, we could absolutely fix this today. And again, I showed you that pipeline. Medtronic actually has this product. And again, we talk about the pipeline needs to be fully functional for people to benefit. And it's available in pretty much every country they sell pumps, except for the United States. Very, very frustrating. So in this case, what happens is when this alarm goes off and this person doesn't respond, the pump ceases to deliver insulin for 2 hours. And that would absolutely have prevented this seizure. So the question is, well, why is FDA doing this to us? It's not smart. FDA, and I'll get into that. So we actually have a strategy, and again, less until none. Ideally, we would love to have an artificial pancreas, a device that does everything that your pancreas does before you get diabetes. You know, that took tens of millions of years to evolve and happen. But that's our goal, is to come close. You know, we have airplanes that fly across the country. They don't fly just like birds, but they get us places very quickly, and it's very convenient. We can do better with devices, but we can do stuff in the near term that could really help us, and I'll show you. So there's the Bayo. You know, low glucose shut off, that exists around the world. I'll talk about that. This is going to be very powerful. This is called hypominimization, or what we call in the industry PLGS, or predictive low glucose suspend. This is a pump. When you're wearing a sensor and a pump, what's going to happen in the very near future is it's going to see your blood sugar trending down. So we have exercisers here. Jack, you're riding on your bike and your glucose starts going down and you're not looking at your sensor, it will predictively dial back insulin delivery. This is especially powerful overnight, because what we've seen in the studies where we've used these systems is it minimizes almost all lows overnight automatically. And unlike a CGM where it's alarming, we talk about diabetes as, again, not being just you. When my sensor alarms overnight, of course I never wake up. My wife wakes up, and it makes her crazy. Beep, beep, vibrate, vibrate, beep, beep, beep. And she's like, please go get something to eat. And, you know, I will or I won't. And I go right back to sleep. And she's awake all night, and it ruins her night's sleep. So this does it without alarms. And we have a study, for example, at Stanford and the University of Colorado, where the kids go to bed, it sits on their bedstand, this is happening right now, and they turn it on, and they turn it off in the morning. And there are no alarms. And I can tell you, again, this will eliminate. Now, if I go back to my hotel and I give a 10-unit bolus and don't eat anything, I'll go to Grader's and have a big ice cream sundae, I decide not to, I would get low. We call it minimizer, not preventer, because if you overdose insulin, you can't pull it back out. But if you do your normal thing and you're trending down because I took an hour run and ran over these hills, which are quite tough here in Cincinnati, it would absolutely prevent my hypo. This will be approved in Europe this year. Amazing. Amazing stuff. Now the question becomes, could you dose insulin automatically? And I'll finish up quickly here. We now have studies that look at what we call treat to range. You know, the sensors, I'm sure I'll get a question, sensor's not ready for prime time yet. I've used the sensor, it's not good enough. You know, the sensors are evolving quickly. I'm using the new Dexcom. It's amazing. Medtronic has a new sensor that will be approved here in the United States, hopefully any day now. We will not be able to restore normal blood sugar tomorrow. But what if we took those teenagers who even have 12 hours a day above 180 and made that 2 or 3 hours a day above 180? We could probably eliminate almost all diabetes complications right now. Right now, with sensors that are not perfect. So this is an approach that we're doing and studying right now. And I think I have some slides. This is one of the slides. Some of you, we should send you the link to the video of one of our staff members who's participated in these trials, where they're using the system. It's on a real cell phone. It's an Android cell phone. And they go out, they eat dinner, they walk around. It's real world stuff. And what it shows you is it has a high traffic light, a low traffic light. It has little buttons if you're exercising or not. And this is happening. And we'll launch a big, probably 200 to 300 person study of this in the United States and Europe within the next 12 months. Absolutely amazing. So that's what that cell phone does is it listens to a Dexcom sensor and talks to what's called a tandem pump, which is a nice new pump that just got FDA approval. And the person with diabetes has the cell phone. So this is real stuff. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And when you talk to the folks who do it, you know, I haven't participated in the trial, but you should watch the video. One of the key things, I started off talking about better sugar control, less burden. One of the things you'll hear most about from these people who tried this is for the first time in sometimes 20, 30 years, they felt like they had a break, which I think is really, really meaningful. This is just give you an example. One of the other doctors, this is Dr. Roman Avorka, who's at Cambridge University in England. This is just one of his studies to show, and he did this one in the hospital, but it's something that everybody here is probably familiar with. It's hard to see. But what they do is they took the kids in, they had them do a bunch of exercising, and then they put them to bed. And the kids, at first, they did their best estimates of what they would do to keep their blood sugar control overnight, and then they had the artificial pancreas to it. So what you can see is the error, the range of glucose levels, and what should be pretty obvious is the lighter versions, there's a bigger spread, and the darker version, it's very tightly controlled. And you'll see over here what it says is 50% more time in target. This is European units, but 4 is 72, and 8 is 144. So they're trying to keep them between 72 and 144. And no severe hypos in the artificial pancreas group, 9 where they had to get the kids up and give them something to eat in the open loop. So Roman, who's an amazing mathematician, they now have these kids using this system at home in England. They have a ton of kids now where the kids go home, there's no doctor or nurse there, and this system works for them overnight. So again, they're just wearing a CGM, there's a little laptop at their bedside, and they have a pump. And they hit a button that turns it on, and they hit a button in the morning that turns it off. And these are not like contrived experiments. A lot of the graphs he'll show, it'll say 2 a.m. to 12 noon. You know, these are kids who are doing their normal thing. They're, you know, college kids, they're younger kids. And this is in England right now going on. He's going to report this data out in a month or two. It's game-changing. It's amazing.
So there's no physical link between the pump and the sensor that gets it remotely?
No, it's what you're wearing right now, running automatically in a laptop talking to it.
Okay, so it only works if you're carrying that laptop?
Right now it's at bedside, so this one is just overnight. The cell phone version is just the cell phone in their pocket. That will be, when we launch that study, probably in the very beginning of 2014, there'll be preliminary studies this year where it would be me here with my cell phone in my pocket. In fact, in Boston, just last week I was at FDA, and one of the researchers we funded and now NIH is funding, they have the folks, it's iPhone based, talking to a Dexcom, and I think he's using a tandem pump as well. And they have them all over the Boston Peninsula. They're free to roam, go to museums, go out to dinner, have breakfast, and they just stay at the hotel. And there's no wires, it's just an iPhone with a special connector at the bottom. So this is not pie in the sky anymore. This is people doing it, and it absolutely blows away. The lows and highs are just reduced many, many fold. And this is Ed. He's the one doing the Boston study. He actually has, the people actually wear 2 pumps. One with insulin and one with glucagon. And most people don't want to wear 2 pumps. This is the preliminary experiments to show that this works. JDRF just announced we're funding a company that will build both hormones together in 1 pump. Very cool. I'm going to quickly, we can talk about the insulin, some of the challenges, just some of the other things. We have a project with BD on, in the near term, the infusion sets, they'll make better. In the longer term, they have a project where the infusion set would be a needle that you could barely see. You can pull out your pennies or your change in your wallet. That's how big the needle would be. And this has a benefit. The insulin actually works faster when you use such a tiny needle. Very neat. I talked about glucose responsive insulin. This is just a chemistry slide. I know we have some P&G chemists in the room. How that works. Other hormones are important. That's one final area that we're focusing on. Most people don't appreciate that people with type 1 stop making insulin. They also stop making a hormone called amylin. We've been doing closed loop experiments using insulin and amylin together. It plays an important role in digestive physiology. And I'll finish. I oscillated that should I pull this slide given what happened in Boston on Monday. But, you know, I run for Team JDRF. This is a picture. We had 30 runners in Boston. Unfortunately, none were hurt. You know, just to echo what Jack has done such an amazing job. He's biking with type 1 diabetes and 85 years old. I can't even come close, but what I can say is I run marathons with diabetes. And when I did this one, I actually qualified for Boston. And, you know, it shows you, I always say my parents, I really am grateful for my parents put no limits on my brother and I. My brother was diagnosed when he was 3. I was diagnosed when I was 13. That was in 1977 and 1984. We both are very fortunate to have no diabetes complications. When I ran for Team JDRF this year, in this picture, this was mile 18, if you zoom into that picture of my family, and the JDRF cheer zone was there in New York. Of all the people who ran, we had about, I think, 7 or 8 who had type 1, and the rest were family members or people who had a connection to type 1. I came in first, nerdy scientist, had the best time. And it just shows you that we aren't there. I know, I think Ann and Jack and the folks who've been doing this a long time, you know, we oscillate between the glass being half full and being very frustrated a lot of the time. Like, God, we want to be there so badly. But what I can say is, and Jack, you said this, I mean, life is amazing, and you can do amazing things with diabetes. And to the parents in the room, I just hope that I can impart that, you know, your kids are going to grow up. Complications are becoming, you know, especially for kids who are diagnosed these days, less and less of a risk. And, you know, we shouldn't have limits, and we will have less and less limits until we do walk away. So I really, really will end with that, and thank you. We couldn't do any of this research without you folks. It's harder and harder to raise money. It's harder and harder to get out there, and you guys go above and beyond. I mean, to come out and listen to a science talk on a Wednesday evening says a lot. So thank you so much. I thank you as a scientist at JDRF. I thank you from my perspective, from my brother, from my parents, from my kids, because I wouldn't be here without folks like you. So happy to answer any questions on what you heard, and happy if you don't have a question tonight to take emails.
While you take questions, I'm going to see if I can pull up the artificial pancreas video.
Oh yeah, sure.
This is fascinating.
You can watch it, it's cool.
Aaron, not so much a question, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity while you have the floor. You spoke about the things that are available in other countries, and you also referred to the FDA. Please speak to the importance of
Yeah.
advocacy.
Yeah, the advocacy component. So you have a bully pulpit as people with diabetes, and you should absolutely take advantage of that. So our advocacy is just as important as our research. And I was talking to the folks today about Congressman Boehner being here, local to you. The funding of type 1 diabetes research, we have a special appropriation of $150 million a year. Congressman Boehner is one of the most important Congresspeople to get that reauthorized every year. And whether it's your congressperson, your senator, the president, being an advocate is one of the most important things we can do. I can tell you, we give money, and that's super important. The money that goes to NIH, $150 million. If that goes away, it goes away. And just think about that. JDRF's budget this year will be about $115 to $120 million. So we just can't pick that research up and run with it. So I urge you all, if you're not, it's the easiest thing you can do. Sign up to be a diabetes advocate. Pester Mr. Boehner.
And also donate to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, it carries a tremendous amount of importance. So the regulatory, I'll talk about the regulatory. Why wouldn't FDA approve that Medtronic product? And I'm not advocating just for Medtronic, but a low glucose suspend. And what happened there was, what's happened, is the FDA was worried about the sensor readings, and the scenario that they were worried about was, what if the sensor says your blood sugar is 50 and it's actually 300? Could you hurt somebody by turning the pump off? Everybody here appreciates that diabetic ketoacidosis, which comes from prolonged high blood sugar, is life-threatening. So could you get diabetic ketoacidosis by turning the pump off for 2 hours? And I can tell you, and I've been here many times, and I'm trying to be diplomatic here, that is an infinitesimally low risk. And we know that, and FDA, and I've spoken to the highest levels of FDA about this, is all about regulatory science. And JDRF and FDA are perfectly and 100% aligned on this. We want safe and effective products, and FDA wants safe and effective products. So again, so why, so they had this risk, and how do we know it's an infinitesimally low risk? Because there's data, and regulatory science and science shows us when the insulin manufacturers looked to put insulin in the pumps, one of the concerns for the chemists in the room is the insulin precipitating in the tubing, crystallizing, solidifying in the tubing, and causing the pump not to deliver insulin. Because proteins like to solidify sometimes. And insulin manufacturers had to do studies looking at what we call occlusions or insulin precipitation. And what they did is took tons of people, lots of people, and they stopped it. They didn't have the insulin precipitate, but they faked that by stopping the insulin delivery and looking at ketone formation over time. And they took people who started at 70, and they took people that started at 300, and said, how fast would you get ketone formation? And what they showed, and what's obvious, is over time, ketones do form, but in a 2-hour window, if your blood sugar is even starting pretty high, it is almost impossible to throw somebody into ketoacidosis if you turn that insulin back on. So we eliminated that with FDA. We should have said, hey, guys, it doesn't happen, and the risk for hypoglycemia is much, much greater. So the next thing they said was, well, okay, that's fine, we're convinced of that. But what happens if you get what they call a decrement in A1C? Meaning your A1C may go up. And I can tell you, I looked the one doctor there in the eyes and I said, essentially, how dare you? I said, that is the doctor and the person with diabetes decision to make. Doctors, and I'm sure we have some doctors in the room, practice medicine. And they make different decisions based upon the person. And again, I took my brother. My brother, who I've spoken about publicly, and he knows this, he's on the board of our local chapter, has had severe hypoglycemia issues. He's had many, many seizures due to hypoglycemia. He's been in many ambulances. He has severe hypo-unawareness. It's not like my parents weren't dedicated. My parents, my dad's a scientist, my mom is as smart as a whip. And they spent countless hours, as many parents in this room do, dedicated to trying to keep our blood sugar under control. And despite their best efforts, sometimes he got lucky. And I said to them, the folks at the FDA, well, what if my brother was willing to trade 6.9 A1C for a 7.3 A1C and didn't end up in the hospital twice a year? Why are you making that decision, FDA? Why shouldn't he and his doctor make that decision? And again, it comes back to diabetes advocacy and the role JDRF plays beyond research is we drafted, FDA puts out what's called guidance to the industry, and what that does is formally, in black and white, set the expectations they have for what it's going to take to do a study or get a device or a drug approved. And we actually authored that for them with the help of a number of experts and the industry, and put that issue to bed. So again, why isn't this device approved in the United States? And again, I can't speak for Medtronic, but the final piece is, it turns out, when I showed you those graphs of a low glucose suspend system versus a predictive low glucose suspend system, the first device is actually much harder to approve than the second. And the reason is the Medtronic Veo, or their low glucose suspend, turns off when you're already low. And the predictive system turns off before you're low. So when you do an experiment, it's actually harder to show a difference with the threshold suspend versus the predictive suspend, because both groups are getting low. But the predictive prevents much more hypoglycemia than the threshold does. So the experiments to get FDA approval are actually much harder for the threshold. And I think that's where Medtronic got hit. Again, I'm not speaking for Medtronic, but our experience in academia is those experiments are actually just much harder. So when that product, and Medtronic just said it again last week, that they expect to get that approved in Europe this summer, I expect it'll be much easier to get approved in the United States. And the pathway actually exists. And when we were at FDA last week, I said, at the end of this meeting with FDA, NIH, JDRF, companies, they said, Aaron, what would make you happy, and what do you say going out of this meeting? And I said, I will throw down the gauntlet and hope that every pump that's sold within the next 2 years has predictive low glucose suspend in it. Now, will that happen? Maybe, maybe not. But Medtronic is already there, and if Medtronic is already there, everybody should be moving right behind them. So,
And you put it out there for them.
and I challenged, and we will fund some of that.
Well, thanks for speaking to that, because in addition to our dollars, that is, our voices are
Very, very important. Very important. Other questions? Happy to.
So is it approved anywhere?
I'm sorry? Predictive? Predictive not.
an escapee.
Frenzy. No, predictive's not approved yet, but they have said publicly they expect this summer.
That was not predictive. Or maybe it was. Very
Fully within your power. One of the pragmatic, so the question is, can you go offshore and get these devices? I mean, I know we talk about the bikers, we have a huge contingent of bikers, JDRF riders here. So for example, Lauren Schiff, who's one of our amazing JDRF volunteers from Canada, he actually comes to the United States to get the Dexcom study. And that's an area that we're ahead of Canada on. The Canadians have the Medtronic Veo available to them. So could you go to Europe or Canada when that gets approved? Absolutely. That would be on you, and you could get it prescribed and do that. But from a person with diabetes and a business model perspective, that's not ideal, because if that's the only way to do it, the companies are not incentivized to do the next step. And if that's the model, it will all fall apart. And the United States business drives everything. So we need the United States to approve devices. And when I came out of this meeting at FDA last week, one of the things that encouraged me is I actually think FDA is no longer the barrier. Because of the advocacy and the work that JDRF and our volunteers have done, I actually, and if there are company people in here, I've said it to your bosses, I think the companies have to do it. And the pathway exists, and I actually think the companies are doing it and will do it, and they'll do it faster now. And JDRF will fund some of their research, the companies are going to do some of that. But the FDA pathway today exists because of our advocacy. Again, not to get too detailed here, but one of the biggest problems at FDA was actually just one doctor. And I can't say if it was JDRF or not, but they don't work on their budget anymore.
SEAL Team 6?
Seriously?
We have our wonderful JDRF funded researcher who's here from Ohio State, and he's working on a nano vaccine, which to me, you know, I've been in this game for 38 years. It is the most exciting research that I've heard as far as preventing and curing diabetes. So, Eric, would you just say, you know, 3 minutes about your work, because JDRF is full speed ahead on this.
I prepared absolutely nothing. I'm developing with funds from the JDRF a vaccine that try to educate the immune system to prevent the inflammatory response. So basically re-educate the immune system to teach it that the islet cells are not dangerous, they're cell tissue. And so using nanotechnology, we use particles basically that can target immune cells. So immune cells have the ability to internalize bacteria, and so we kind of develop using nanotechnology a pathogen mimic where the cells of the immune system can internalize these particles, and then we can re-educate and prevent the inflammatory response.
Wow. So theoretically, tell them why this could work for diabetes as far as preventing it.
So we can load into our particles different proteins that are associated with islet cells, and so we can educate the immune system to say, you know, these proteins that you're generating immune response against are safe, and that can somehow make the immune cells stop their immune response. And then this can also be tied into other autoimmune diseases. So before we were funded by the JDRF, we had an NIH grant working on multiple sclerosis. And so in mice anyway, we were able to stop a pre-existing immune response. And so that's the problem with all these vaccines for type 1 diabetes, is you have a pre-existing immune response. And how can you, basically the immune system is very stubborn, and how can we kind of skew it to a response that's much safer? And so that's the research that we're being funded through the...
Is it an analogy to allergy shots?
I'm sorry, it's exactly like allergy shots. I had allergy shots growing up all the time, and so the allergy shots are actually promoting the inflammatory response, but when you have your nose dripping and stuff like that, you can kind of skew the immune response, so it's a much safer response.
But because we know about beta cell regeneration now, which we really didn't know about until a couple, 10 years ago, even those of us who've had type 1 for a long, long time, or physical for a long time, you're still making new beta cells, just like you're making new skin cells and hair cells. And so if they would stop the autoimmune response, then over a period of years, you would build up enough new brain
Right.
cells that you wouldn't need to take insulin because you make enough insulin.
This vaccine could be, when a vaccine hopefully becomes successful, it could be skewed with, it could be combined with other technologies like islet transplantations and things like that. Encapsulation. Because eventually, hopefully, the encapsulation will prevent the immune system, but maybe if you tie these two together, you have synergy, and you can prevent the immune response.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
And JDRF, it's really putting a lot of money and effort behind it. It's kind of big.
And then also, this is not my research, I really like the idea, this advocacy, calling Boehner and stuff like that. Because the problem if the NIH cuts funding, not only would it affect our lab, but also we have graduate students and postdocs who eventually will grow up someday and have their own labs. And so, for instance, we have a graduate student in our lab who actually wants to, he's crazy, but he wants to do policy. And so, the other graduate students, if we lose funding with this, they might also become senators as well. We would prefer them to be scientists.